They were trained to face bullets, bombs, and blood, not silence. The jungle around them wasn't empty. It was listening. Radios hummed with voices that weren't theirs. The air carried whispers that moved against the wind, and the deeper they marched, the more the world behind them seemed to fade. Footsteps echoed, but not in rhythm, as if something else was walking with them, mimicking every move. Then in one final transmission, a soldier's voice broke through the static. "It's not the enemy, it's the ground." After that, nothing, no trace, no return. The air was thick enough to chew when the orders came through. A recon team, 20 soldiers, tasked to push beyond the marked lines into a sector that had been erased from every active map. The commander called it routine terrain verification. The men called it suicide. Still, soldiers obey. Boots hit mud, rifles slung tight, and a silence followed them that didn't belong in war. Even the wind seemed reluctant to move that day. They advanced into the tree line, where sunlight broke apart and vanished like smoke. The canopy above was so dense it swallowed the sky. Compass needles twitched violently, spinning as though the forest itself was alive and disoriented. A few men joked about superstition, but the laughter died quickly when the first radio failed. Static chewed through their connection, whispering in tones no one recognized. The lieutenant tried recalibrating his receiver. He swore he heard breathing on the other end, slow and deliberate, like someone was listening from just a few feet away. When he spoke into the mic, the sound stopped abruptly. The jungle answered back with total silence. That's when everyone noticed. The insects were gone. Not one buzz, not one chirp, just the sound of their own heartbeats. They pushed deeper, trying to keep formation. Every step forward made the ground feel heavier, softer, almost breathing. Mud stuck to their boots, as though the earth didn't want to let go. The air reeked of iron and wet rot. Something old lived here. Older than the war, older than the trees themselves. The sergeant muttered a prayer under his breath, his eyes fixed on the branches that swayed without wind. By the second mile, morale was breaking. Sweat poured down their faces, even though the air had turned cold. The corporal marked trees with white chalk to guide their way back, but when they looked behind, the marks were gone. Replaced, the bark was smooth, untouched, as if the forest healed itself in seconds. The men exchanged glances, but no one dared to speak the word forming in their minds. Trapped. Night came without warning. One moment the light was dull and gray, the next it was gone entirely. Lanterns flickered to life, their glow trembling like frightened eyes. Shadows danced wildly on the trunks, stretching too long, too thin. The radio operator tried sending a location ping, but the transmission bounced back. His own message repeating, distorted and ending with laughter. They set up a temporary camp, laying tripwires and motion sensors, though no one expected them to work. The lieutenant scribbled a report by firelight, documenting compass failures, radio interference, and a persistent sense of observation. The word fear didn't appear once, but it hung heavy between every line. The men ate in silence, their spoons clinking softly against metal cans that felt too loud. A private claimed he saw something watching them through the trees, two pale reflections like eyes catching the firelight. The others followed his stare, rifles raised, but saw nothing. Only the forest, motionless and infinite. Still, no one laughed at him. They moved the perimeter inward, tighter, as though the darkness had shrunk the world around them. Sometime after midnight, one of the motion sensors tripped. A faint click echoed, followed by a metallic ping. The squad froze, rifles trained outward. Nothing moved. The lieutenant gave the order to hold fire, but the sensor triggered again, closer this time. Then came the sound, something dragging slowly through the underbrush, heavy, rhythmic, deliberate. Every man held his breath. The fire dimmed suddenly, burning half as bright. One soldier reached to stoke it, and his hand came back wet. Not with water, but with sap thick as blood. The flames hissed and recoiled, shrinking lower. In that suffocating half-light, they heard it again, breathing, not human. Deep, layered, and close enough to feel. The forest wasn't quiet anymore. It was awake. The lieutenant barked orders for a flare, and the sky lit crimson. For 1 second, they saw everything. The trees, the fog, and something massive moving just beyond the light's reach. It slithered between trunks too wide to be an animal, too fluid to be mechanical. Then the flare burned out, plunging them back into blackness. What followed was worse than silence. It was whispering. The voices came from all directions, soft at first, then louder, overlapping. Each soldier heard something different. Some heard loved ones calling their names. Others heard their own voices echoing back from the dark. One man dropped his weapon and ran into the trees, screaming. They never saw him again. The forest swallowed the sound of his footsteps almost instantly. They regrouped, panic eroding discipline. The sergeant ordered a fallback, but the way they came from was gone. The path had shifted. Where there should have been footprints, there was only smooth, untouched soil. The chalk marks were still missing. It was as though the forest had never been disturbed at all. The realization hit them like cold water. They were being erased. By dawn, they hadn't slept. The air was thicker, almost unbreathable. One soldier claimed the trees had moved closer overnight. No one argued. They didn't have proof, but the clearing did feel smaller. The trunks standing where they hadn't before. Even their tents seemed rearranged. The lieutenant tore through his map in frustration, but it didn't matter. Every coordinate led nowhere. Then came the stench, not the normal rot of vegetation, but something raw and animal. Blood maybe. The corporal followed it a few meters out from camp and found scraps of uniform fabric hanging from a branch, soaked and stiff. No body, no tracks, just the impression of something large having dragged through the dirt. They buried the fabric anyway. The men spoke little after that. Some prayed, others stared blankly into the fog. Every sound felt wrong. The crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves. Even their own voices seemed to echo back distorted, like the forest was repeating their words mockingly. The lieutenant wrote again in his journal, "The air tastes metallic. We're not alone." It would be his last entry. When the second night came, they tried keeping watches in pairs. The first shift went uneventful. The second didn't. The men on duty vanished without a sound, rifles left leaning against their packs. No one had heard a struggle. The fire burned low, untouched, as though time had paused for them alone. By morning, their bedrolls were empty and cold. The survivors started to unravel. One accused another of sabotage, claiming he'd seen him speaking to the trees. The accused swore he hadn't. They nearly came to blows before the sergeant intervened. His voice trembled as he reminded them of their orders. Stay focused, stay alive. But even he couldn't hide the truth in his eyes. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were prey. As they moved out, the ground itself seemed to shift beneath them. Roots coiled above the soil like serpents, gripping at boots, pulling with quiet strength. A private tripped and screamed as something yanked him down. The others pulled him free, but his leg was torn open, smooth as if bitten clean. He wouldn't stop shaking, muttering, "It's under us." The lieutenant called for an emergency extraction. The radio crackled alive, but the voice that answered wasn't from command. It repeated his words back perfectly, tone for tone, before adding, "You shouldn't have come." Then silence. Static filled the air again, but the damage was done. Every man felt the same cold realization. They weren't meant to leave. Thunder rolled overhead, though the sky remained clear. The jungle roared back with sound, branches snapping, distant howls that rose and fell in impossible patterns. Men fired blindly into the dark, their muzzle flashes illuminating twisted shapes darting between trees. The forest absorbed every bullet, every scream. When the guns ran dry, the sounds didn't stop. They ran. Discipline shattered, fear took over. Some tripped and never rose again. Others vanished mid-stride, as though stepping through invisible doors. The lieutenant was last seen shouting coordinates into the void, his voice drowned beneath the noise of the living jungle. When daylight came again, there was nothing left but an empty camp and trampled earth that smoothed itself flat. Days later, another unit arrived, following faint distress pings that ended abruptly near the tree line. They found no bodies, no signs of battle, not even a spent cartridge. Only a single boot half buried in the dirt, still upright, as if waiting for the man to return. The air around it was warm, pulsing faintly, like something beneath the surface was breathing slow and deep. No one spoke on the way back. The commander who'd issued the orders filed the report himself. Recon team lost, presumed KIA. He burned the journal that had been recovered, though it was half blank, half filled with sketches of trees shaped like human faces. After that, the area was marked off limits. Maps redrew the borders, and the name of the sector was quietly erased. And so, the men were gone, swallowed not by war, not by enemy fire, but by the land itself. Whatever waited out there in the soil was patient. It didn't kill for hunger. It killed for remembrance, ensuring those who entered its domain never truly left. The war ended, but the jungle remained, whispering to itself, waiting for the next set of orders. The morning began with a silence that felt wrong. No birds, no wind, just the low hum of an atmosphere so heavy it made breathing feel like work. The fog had rolled in overnight, slow and deliberate, creeping between the trees like it knew exactly where to go. Visibility dropped to mere feet. Even the nearest soldier looked ghost-like, his outlines shifting in and out of focus. The world had turned gray, and the war itself seemed to hold its breath. At first, the men believed it was just weather. Mountain condensation, natural as rain. But nature doesn't move like this. It wasn't floating, it was crawling. The mist seemed alive, curling around their boots, swirling when they exhaled, reacting to sound. Every whisper sent ripples through the fog, distorting it like disturbed water. The captain ordered them to stay quiet, but the silence pressed back harder. One man claimed he could hear movement from inside it, footsteps echoing, too many to count, yet too soft to belong to soldiers. When he raised his rifle toward the sound, the fog recoiled slightly, then surged forward. He fired once. The flash from his muzzle disappeared before the light even touched the smoke. No sound followed, just the fog thickening, closing in tighter. By the second hour, the temperature dropped. Frost formed on their packs even though it wasn't cold enough for ice. The radio operator tried to send a location ping, but the signal bounced back like it hit a wall. "It's feeding off the sound waves," he muttered. Nobody laughed. They could feel it too, the air absorbing their voices, swallowing them whole. Then came the first disappearance. A soldier on point, barely 5 meters ahead, stepped into the haze and didn't come out the other side. They called his name, again and again, but the fog muffled their words like wet fabric. His flashlight flickered once in the distance, then nothing. When they moved forward, his footprints ended abruptly, the last mark pressed deep, like he'd been yanked straight down. The commander ordered a fallback, but direction no longer meant anything. Their compasses spun aimlessly. The landmarks, trees, rocks, trenches, all blended into the same endless gray. Every direction looked identical. The fog wasn't covering the terrain, it was replacing it. The world they knew had been erased and rewritten in vapor. Panic set in slowly. Men whispered prayers, rubbed talismans, checked their rifles as if bullets could stop something without form. The sergeant tried to rally them, shouting, "Stay tight, follow the sound of my voice." But even as he spoke, his words broke apart mid-air, fragments of syllables falling dead between them. The fog devoured sound. It wanted silence. Time unraveled. Minutes felt like hours. Watches stopped ticking. One soldier swore he saw shapes moving in the mist, human silhouettes walking parallel to them, identical in posture and gear. When he called out, one of the shadows raised its hand in perfect sync, a mirror image. Then the shape stepped forward, merging into the haze, leaving only faint outlines behind. They found a trench line, or what used to be one. Sandbags half collapsed, rifles scattered, but no bodies. It was as if a battle had taken place, and every soldier had been dissolved into the air. A faint metallic taste clung to their tongues like breathing rust. The captain crouched and touched the mud. It was warm. Beneath it, he felt faint vibrations, like heartbeats, too slow to be human. When night fell, the fog didn't lift. It thickened. Lanterns burned dim, their glow trapped inside a 1-foot radius. A soldier tried to light a flare. It sputtered and went out instantly as though the air itself refused to ignite. The men huddled together, hearing whispers from every direction. Some sounded like their own voices, repeating words they hadn't spoken yet. One private started to cry, claiming he heard his brother calling him from the mist. No one dared to stop him when he walked into it. They were too afraid to move. His sobs faded quickly, replaced by soft laughter that didn't sound human. Moments later, his shadow passed behind them, walking the opposite way. But when they turned, there was no one there. By dawn, half the unit was missing. The remaining soldiers formed a perimeter, though none could see more than a few steps in any direction. The fog made sound deceptive. Footsteps echoed from nowhere, sometimes close, sometimes impossibly far. It felt like the world was folding in on itself, every echo circling back to where it began. The lieutenant ordered flares again, but they refused to burn. Even gunfire was muffled, reduced to dull thuds swallowed by the air. The fog shimmered faintly when bullets passed through it, like ripples on liquid. Then from within it came a reflection, flashes of their own faces staring back, twisted and hollow-eyed. "It's us," someone whispered, but not alive. They tried marking their location with string, tying it between trees to trace a path. Within minutes, the rope vanished, eaten by the gray. Some men claimed to still feel it in their hands even after it disappeared, cold, slick, pulsing like something alive. A corporal tore at his gloves, screaming, saying the rope was under his skin. The commander finally broke. He ordered an all-out retreat, firing signal flares in random directions. One of them worked, briefly illuminating a shape towering above them, tall and indistinct, like smoke with bones. Its movement was fluid, unnatural, bending through the fog, as if the mist itself was its body. Then it was gone, leaving behind a sound that wasn't quite a growl, more like a sigh. Hours passed without a sense of progress. The fog grew thinner in moments, then thick again, pulsing like a living organism. One soldier said he saw sunlight. He sprinted toward it, disappearing in seconds. When they reached where he had been, there was no light, no trace of him, just an outline burned faintly into the air like heat distortion. By the third day, the survivors had stopped speaking. Their throats were raw, and breathing burned. The fog wasn't air anymore. It was something denser, almost liquid. Their lungs ached. Each inhale felt heavier than the last, as though they were drawing the mist inside themselves. The medic noted their veins darkening, turning gray beneath the skin. One by one, the men began to slow. Their movements dulled, their eyes clouded over. The commander tried to keep them moving, but his own steps faltered. He looked down and saw that the fog wasn't just clinging to his legs. It was inside them, coiling like smoke beneath his skin. He didn't scream. He just looked up and whispered, "It's already taken us." By the time the rescue team arrived, there was no fog left, only a strange shimmer in the air. The ground was marked with shallow depressions, hundreds of footprints ending mid-stride. Equipment lay scattered, coated in fine gray dust. The radio still buzzed faintly, transmitting fragments of a final message, visibility 0. Men fading, can't, then silence. The new unit set up camp, unaware that the air around them was thicker than normal. They noted how quiet everything seemed, too quiet. One soldier coughed, saying the mist burned his throat. Another swore he saw movement near the tree line, a faint glimmer like breath in winter air. The lieutenant dismissed it, saying fog was just weather. It rolled in slowly, just as before, silent, steady, unstoppable. The lanterns dimmed, the camp shrank, and the first screams came from the perimeter. By dawn, the clearing was empty again, the fog thin and innocent as morning dew. Only the sound of boots crunching faintly beneath the soil lingered, fading deeper into the gray distance, marching nowhere. The radio first came alive just after dawn. The static had been constant through the night, a familiar comfort in the chaos. But this time it wasn't random noise. Beneath the hiss, a voice began to form. Faint, clipped, and distant. The operator froze, twisting the dial with precision. The others gathered close, waiting. The voice was speaking their language, but the cadence was wrong, off by half a breath, like a recording played backward through time. The transmission repeated, coordinates, a set of numbers none of them recognized. The commander ordered them checked against the map, but the coordinates didn't exist anywhere in known territory. The navigator insisted the grid belonged to a location wiped from all reconnaissance data years ago. Yet the voice repeated the numbers again, this time louder, followed by a faint metallic tapping. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Morse code for SOS. But it wasn't theirs. The operator leaned in, lowering the volume instinctively. The sound wasn't bouncing from the airwaves. It was coming from somewhere nearby. Every time the message played, their compasses shivered. Metal gear buzzed faintly, vibrating as though the ground itself was transmitting the signal. One soldier tapped his helmet. He swore he could feel it humming against his skull. They thought it might be an enemy trap, a psychological broadcast meant to lure them. The commander ordered the radio shut down, but even after the switch was cut, the sound didn't stop. The voice continued through the dead speaker, faint and trembling, like it wasn't using electricity at all. The air seemed to hum in rhythm, syncing with the pulses of static. Then, for the first time, the voice said a name: the operators. He dropped the headset immediately. The men stepped back as the voice continued, whispering the names of every man present, one by one, in the same exact tone each of them used when calling roll. The commander tried to speak over it, shouting commands, but his voice came back through the static, distorted and delayed by seconds. Then the transmission ended abruptly, leaving behind only the faint smell of ozone. The silence that followed was unbearable. A private suggested destroying the radio, but the commander refused. "If it's transmitting, it's connecting to something," he said. "We find the source." They packed up and moved toward the direction of the signal, tracking the faint interference on their compasses. Every few minutes, the static returned, guiding them like a mechanical heartbeat. The deeper they went, the stronger it grew. Soon the interference was strong enough to make their helmets buzz, and their rifles trembled when raised. Then they found the wires, thin copper lines tangled in the underbrush, leading into the forest like veins. They followed them for nearly a mile until the trees opened into a clearing filled with rusted equipment. Towers, antennas, cables, half buried in moss, a forgotten listening post. The structure was ancient, built long before their war began. Signs marked it as decommissioned, but everything still worked. The lights flickered as they entered, and the hum of a generator echoed from below. The radio operator tested one of the consoles, and the moment his hand touched it, every machine came alive. Screens blinked with unreadable data. The same coordinates flashed across them, again and again. Then, beneath the noise, came the voice. It was clearer now. "You shouldn't be here." Everyone froze. The voice wasn't broadcast through speakers this time. It was coming from all around them. Through their helmets, their gear, their bones. The words vibrated inside their skulls, low and deep. Then came another sound, rhythmic tapping, metallic and wet. The operator traced it to a corner of the room where a headset hung, still connected, still dripping with condensation. It was warm to the touch. The sergeant lifted the headset slowly. On the other end, someone was breathing, shallow, quick, terrified. "Identify yourself," the sergeant demanded. No response, just breathing. Then faintly, a whisper, "Don't answer it." The line went dead. Before anyone could react, every radio in the room turned on at once, blasting the same frequency, screaming static that shaped itself into words no one could understand. They ran outside, stumbling through the clearing, but the sound followed them. It wasn't coming from the building anymore. It was inside their gear. Helmets vibrated, earpieces hissed, and their dog tags clicked together like chattering teeth. The commander threw his radio to the ground and stomped it, but the noise only grew louder, echoing from the trees now, bouncing between trunks like sonar. A private ripped off his helmet, clutching his head as blood trickled from his nose. "It's in me," he gasped. The others dragged him forward, but his veins were already dark, pulsing faintly with light under his skin. He convulsed once, and the radio static from the building shifted tone, a long, drawn-out scream that matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. When he fell still, the scream stopped. The surviving men stood motionless. The fog had returned, wrapping the clearing like a curtain, muffling the world. Somewhere in the distance, the transmission restarted, the same numbers. The same voice, but now the voice sounded familiar. Identical to their commanders, the operator refused to move closer, shaking his head. "It's recording us," he said. "It's making copies." They burned the equipment, every wire, every terminal, every antenna. The fire crackled weakly in the damp air, throwing shadows across the ruins. The smoke didn't rise. It hung low, swirling around their legs, like the fog itself was breathing it in. And then, through the crackling fire, the radio came alive again, whispering softly, "You can't burn what isn't here." They fled, running until the forest swallowed the sound. For hours, nothing followed. No voices, no interference. Then one of the soldiers, exhausted and half delirious, raised his hand. From his wrist, a faint hum vibrated. They all fell silent. It wasn't coming from the air. It was coming from inside him. Underneath his skin, a low, rhythmic pulse of static. He looked up, eyes wide, and said, "It moved." The commander ordered silence, but it was too late. Every man began to feel it. The vibration under their flesh, the faint buzz in their teeth, the invisible frequency crawling through their bones. They dropped their gear, their radios, their helmets, but the hum remained, constant, alive. The signal no longer needed machines. It had found something new to transmit through. When night came, they tried to sleep, but every time one of them closed their eyes, the static turned into whispers. Voices spoke in fragments, overlapping in strange rhythms, repeating the same question in dozens of tones. "Where are you?" Some men tried answering. Those who did stopped breathing within minutes, their mouths still open, as if something had climbed out instead of in. By morning, they were shadows of themselves. The fog had thinned, but the sound was louder, rising and falling like breathing. The operator smashed his last radio and fell to his knees, begging the forest to stop. The commander stood beside him, clutching his head as blood began to seep from his ears. Then, as if in response, every radio frequency within miles went silent. Even the wind stopped. For a few long minutes, there was peace. Then a distant transmission crackled through the commander's earpiece. A voice whispering softly, "You found us." He turned toward the tree line and saw faint figures forming within the mist, hundreds of them, outlines flickering with light. They weren't enemies. They weren't men. They were echoes, soldiers repeating movements from another time, mouths moving in perfect sync with the static. The last thing recorded in the commander's journal described a sound like metal screaming underwater. The ink bled halfway down the page before the words cut off. When another squad arrived weeks later, they found the clearing empty, except for burned-out equipment and melted helmets fused into the soil. The air still hummed faintly. Their own radios picked up nothing but a whisper, coordinates that didn't exist. Years later, a transmission surfaced on a secured frequency, broadcasting without origin. It contained no message, no voice, just breathing, steady, and human. Audio experts analyzed it and discovered a faint heartbeat underneath, pulsing at the same rate as standard military cadence. When slowed down, the breathing formed words. "Still here." Those who heard it claimed the signal followed them afterward, faint, inaudible at first, then louder in moments of silence. Radios turning on by themselves, whispering their names when no one else was around. Some say it's a frequency trapped between worlds. Others say it's the forest remembering, but the ones who really listen never stop hearing it. The soil shifted under their boots, soft but restless. It wasn't like mud or clay, it was something that responded. Each step pressed down and released with a faint sigh, as if the ground exhaled when touched. At first they thought it was the moisture, the jungle breathing steam after rain, but then it pulsed again, longer this time, like a heartbeat just beneath the surface. No one spoke of it, but every man felt it. Their training had taught them to trust the earth, dig trenches, lie prone, feel its vibrations to sense approaching enemies. Now that same earth seemed treacherous, alive in a way they couldn't explain. The commander ordered calm, but his voice quivered as the ground swelled faintly beneath him. For a moment, it lifted his boot as if to remind him that the land didn't belong to him anymore. The medic dropped to one knee, pressing a gloved hand to the soil. It was warm. Not the radiant warmth of sunlight, but body heat. Wet, constant, and alive. He pulled back, whispering that it was too soft, like skin over muscle. The others stared at him in disbelief, until the vibration began again. A low rumble passed through the camp, subtle yet deep enough to make their teeth ache. Their instruments reacted next. Compasses spun without direction, seismographs flickered erratically, and the radio emitted slow, rhythmic static in time with the tremors. "It's not an earthquake," the technician muttered. "It's breathing." The words hung there, absurd yet undeniable. The jungle floor inhaled and exhaled, each motion deeper than the last. It wasn't wind. It wasn't movement. It was something beneath them waking up. That night, no one slept. The fog lingered low, blanketing the ground as if hiding something massive beneath it. The soldiers huddled together, listening to faint pops and cracks echoing under the soil like bones shifting in the dark. Once, a mound rose several inches before collapsing with a hiss, releasing warm air that smelled of rust and decay. One man swore he saw the dirt ripple like water. By dawn, a thin layer of dew covered everything. But it wasn't dew, it was condensation, moist and warm, dripping upward from below rather than falling from above. Their gear was slick with it, and their boots squelched in places that hadn't been wet the night before. When they tried to dig a trench, the soil refused to hold its shape. It writhed back into place, sealing itself as fast as they could carve it. The commander decided to move the unit east, toward higher ground. They packed quickly, avoiding the patches of earth that seemed to move. As they marched, the sensation grew worse. The ground seemed to swell beneath their feet, rising and falling in waves that made the horizon tremble. They moved faster, but the sound followed, deep, rhythmic, and deliberate like the slow inhale of a sleeping beast. They stopped near a ridge to catch their breath. The air was heavy, vibrating faintly. Then one soldier crouched and pointed. The leaves around his boots were trembling, not from wind, but from tiny bursts of air pushing upward through the soil. "It's alive," someone muttered. The sergeant snapped at him to stay quiet, but when he looked down, the dirt under his own boots was pulsing too. Suddenly, the vibrations intensified. The earth convulsed once, a violent spasm that threw them off balance. Cracks split the ground, steam erupting through the gaps in thick, sulfurous bursts. The sound was deafening, not like thunder, but like the roar of a giant lung exhaling after centuries of silence. Then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. The forest went dead still. They gathered themselves, shaken but unhurt. The medic tried to measure the temperature again. It had risen by nearly 10 degrees. The fog above the ground now glowed faintly in the low light, shimmering like heat waves. He held his hand near the soil and felt the pulse once more, steady now, strong and rhythmic. "It's under us," he whispered. No one argued. Hours passed. The ground remained quiet, but tension lingered like a second heartbeat in their ears. Then came the smell, copper and salt, blood. They followed it until they reached a clearing where the soil was stained dark red. A single helmet lay in the center, half melted, half fused into the earth. The edges smoked faintly. The commander called for a perimeter, but the land was already shifting again. The red stain began to sink, slowly, like liquid draining down a massive throat. The soldiers backed away, rifles raised. One man stumbled, his foot sinking several inches into the ground. He yanked it free, leaving behind his boot. The soil swallowed it whole, closing over the hole like nothing had happened. The only sound was a low, wet gulp that made every stomach twist. That night, they moved camp again, farther uphill, closer to rock. The vibrations were weaker there, but still present. The medic couldn't stop shaking. He claimed he could feel the rhythm in his pulse, syncing with it. The commander told him to rest, but the man refused to sleep. When the others woke at dawn, his cot was empty, his blanket folded neatly. In his place, there was only a shallow indentation in the ground, steaming faintly. Fear fractured the group. Men spoke less, eyes darting constantly to the ground. Every sound made them flinch. When one soldier accidentally dropped his canteen, it didn't bounce, it sank an inch and began to tremble as if caught in quicksand. The commander ordered everyone to keep moving, but even his voice cracked now. They were marching on something alive, and it knew they were there. The next day brought rain, or so they thought. The droplets hit the canopy but evaporated before reaching the ground. The mist thickened, blurring their vision until the forest seemed to dissolve. The soil beneath them rippled again, this time faster, shallower, almost playful. It wasn't breathing anymore. It was moving, testing, searching. One man screamed suddenly. The others turned to see him being dragged downward by something unseen. His arms clawed at the air as the ground consumed him inch by inch. No blood, no struggle, just a silent swallowing motion. His final shout was cut short as his face sank beneath the soil, leaving nothing behind but a disturbed patch of earth that quickly smoothed over. They fired into the ground, dozens of rounds tearing through mud and root. Each bullet vanished without sound, absorbed as if by liquid. The recoil shook their arms, but the earth remained calm, indifferent. Then faintly they heard it again. A slow, deep inhale, the fog thickened, rolling outward like an expanding lung. The commander realized it wasn't attacking anymore. It was surrounding them. They fled toward the ridge, hearts pounding. The forest tilted as the terrain itself shifted under their weight, creating ridges and hollows where none had been. Roots burst from the soil, twisting like tendons, blocking their path. Every few seconds, another pulse passed beneath them, stronger each time. A soldier stumbled and fell, the ground beneath him deflated, exhaling warm air that smelled of rot and old metal. By nightfall, they reached higher ground, rocky and unstable but free of the pulsing soil. They set up camp cautiously, avoiding direct contact with the ground whenever possible. One man claimed he could still feel it vibrating through the rock, like the echo of something immense, moving far below. He said it wasn't one creature but many intertwined, forming the foundation of the jungle itself. Sleep didn't come. The commander sat awake, watching the fog drift below them. From that height, he could see it rising and falling across the valley like waves on a living sea. It was beautiful in a terrible way. Hypnotic, rhythmic, eternal. When he blinked, he swore he saw shapes forming within the mist, long, sinuous outlines moving beneath the surface of the earth, like lungs expanding in the dark. When dawn came, they found one of the guards missing. His rifle was still propped against a boulder, his footprints leading right to the edge of the ridge, and then stopping mid-stride. The stone at the edge was smooth, wet, and slightly indented, as if something had pressed against it from below. The commander didn't speak, he just turned away, ordering the men to pack. As they descended the other side, the vibration returned, faint at first, then steady, rhythmic, endless. The ground didn't shake anymore, it simply pulsed. It had adapted. The forest seemed to breathe in harmony with it. The leaves rising and falling with the invisible rhythm. Even the men's own breathing began to sync without their control. They weren't walking over it anymore, they were part of it. By the time they reached the tree line, the pulse had moved upward. Their chests tightened and their lungs burned as if filled with heavy air. The medic's replacement coughed blood that glowed faintly before sinking into the soil. The commander turned to his remaining men and said the words no one wanted to hear. "It's not the ground that's alive, it's us that's dying." They pressed on, but the pulse followed, louder, closer. Every heartbeat echoed through the earth like a response. When they finally stopped to rest, the fog began to swirl faster around them, forming spirals that matched the rhythm beneath their feet. It wasn't fog anymore, it was breath. The last thing they heard before the mist closed over them completely was a single, massive exhale that carried their names. The men had stopped speaking days ago. Their words no longer carried through the air, swallowed before leaving their mouths. When they tried shouting, the sound evaporated, leaving behind only a pressure that throbbed in their skulls. Their ears rang constantly, a high-pitched hum that pulsed in time with their heartbeats. They began to realize they weren't hearing silence. They were hearing something bigger, something that had taken sound away for itself. Every step felt wrong. Boots sank softly into the soil, but even that made no noise. The crunch of gravel, the rustle of grass, the jingle of gear, all gone. The world had muted itself. The captain motioned for hand signals. Even his gestures seemed heavy, as though the air had thickened around him. The forest was still, its trees unmoving, its fog suspended midair like a frozen sea. At first, they assumed they'd gone deaf. The medic tested them, tapping behind their ears, snapping fingers in front of their faces. They could hear inside the thud of their hearts, the rush of blood, the creak of bones, but nothing external. The world's sound had been stolen. The jungle wasn't just quiet, it had consumed vibration itself. The radio was useless. Static played silently, visible only through the faint flicker of light on the signal reader. The operator slammed his fist against it, but the impact produced nothing. He tried screaming, and though his face contorted with effort, there was only emptiness. He sank to his knees, panting, tears welling from the realization that even his sobs made no sound. They began communicating by writing in dirt, carving words into the ground with their knives. "Keep moving," the captain scrawled. The men nodded and advanced cautiously. Their movements were uncoordinated, jerky, disjointed, soldiers stripped of rhythm. Without sound, even the pace of their march faltered. By midday, the air began to vibrate faintly again. Not sound, resonance. Their chests hummed softly with each breath, like the faint echo of a distant machine. The medic clutched his throat, mouthing that he could feel a noise he couldn't hear. It came from below, the ground thrumming like a buried engine. Each step forward deepened it, the frequency climbing higher until their teeth rattled. Then the vibrations stopped, all at once. The air turned heavy again, pressing against them from every side. The captain motioned for a rest, and the men collapsed near a ridge. One soldier tapped his boot nervously against a rock, trying to make even the faintest sound. None came. Then, as his heel struck the stone a third time, a small crack appeared. From that crack, the faintest whisper escaped. Not air, but something alive. The men froze. The whisper grew louder, though still inaudible, like a voice heard through bone rather than ear. Their bodies responded before their minds did. Adrenaline surging, skin prickling. It was inside them again. The captain gestured for them to move, but every direction looked identical. The forest wasn't guiding them now. It was trapping them. Hours passed, their thirst worsened. Their nerves stretched thin. Without sound, they couldn't gauge distance or direction. When one man tripped and fell, the others didn't notice until they saw him missing. They searched the area, waving their lights. The beam revealed a depression in the soil, shaped like a man's outline, as if the ground had gently molded itself around him and then sealed shut. By nightfall, even the wind refused to move. The fog hung low, solid and thick. When they lit their lamps, the light barely pierced it. Then faintly they began to see the sound, not hear it, but see it. The air shimmered in pulses, invisible waves distorting the space between them. When one soldier waved his hand through it, the shimmer clung to his skin, pulsing like static electricity. He tried to wipe it away, but it crawled up his arm instead. The medic slashed his knife across the shimmer, and though it made no sound, the pulse shuddered violently before vanishing. The soldier's arm, however, didn't stop moving. The muscles twitched uncontrollably, his fingers clawing the dirt. Then, abruptly, he froze. Mouth open, eyes wide, and fell backward. The shimmer reappeared above his body, vibrating faintly before merging into the ground. The others dragged him away, but his skin had turned translucent, veins glowing faintly like threads of glass. When they looked closely, they saw movement beneath his chest, faint ripples, like something small crawling beneath the surface. The captain drew his pistol, but the weapon's click was silent. Even the metal's recoil made no sound, just the ghost of motion. They left the body behind. Each man marched faster, boots landing softly on the lifeless soil, hours blurred together without rhythm, time stretching into one long muted nightmare. Eventually they found a clearing filled with old communication gear, cracked speakers, broken antennas, and a rusted generator still humming faintly. The vibrations were stronger there. The operator ran to inspect it. The generator's lights flickered with no visible power source. The air shimmered above it, forming ripples that expanded outward like invisible waves. He placed his hand above it and immediately recoiled. His palm was vibrating violently, bones quivering as if struck by unseen force. He mouthed to the captain, "It's alive." Suddenly, every light blinked off. The ripples froze midair. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then from the soil beneath the generator came a pulse so strong it lifted the men off their feet. Dust swirled around them in spirals. The fog split apart, revealing patterns burned into the ground. Circular, precise, and moving. Not random formations, but something like a heartbeat. The silence broke for a split second. A low, deep tone filled the air. Too low to be a voice, too perfect to be natural. The men felt it in their bones, vibrating their teeth, their lungs, their skulls. Then it stopped again. The captain mouthed a single word to his men: "Run." They sprinted through the forest, stumbling in the dense gray. The silence returned like a blanket, swallowing everything. Footsteps, breath, heartbeat. It was suffocating. One soldier fell behind, collapsing against a tree. The others turned and saw his lips moving rapidly, screaming something they couldn't hear. Then, one by one, the trees around him began to shake. The vibration returned, stronger than before. The ground rippled outward like a drum struck by invisible hands. Dust rose in waves. The soldier vanished mid-scream, his body folding inward as the air shimmered violently around him. When it cleared, nothing remained, not even a mark. The captain forced the others to keep running, though their legs felt like lead. When they stopped, gasping, one man tapped his chest. His heart was pounding so hard it made his vest quiver. The medic shook his head and lifted his own hand. His chest was still, the pulse wasn't theirs anymore. Something beneath them had taken control of the rhythm, dictating when their hearts should beat. It wasn't synchronized to life, it was synchronized to itself. Panic turned to collapse. They fell in exhaustion, unable to tell if they were breathing or just mimicking motion. The fog began to rise again, drawn toward the soundless sky. For a moment, it formed shapes, outlines of soldiers, hundreds of them, all marching in the same silent step. The captain stared as they disappeared into the gray, leaving faint footprints that glowed for a moment, then faded. He realized they were marching to something, following a rhythm not of their own making. His men were next. They stood automatically, eyes glassy, bodies stiff, and began walking forward without command. He grabbed one, shouting in his face, but there was no reaction. Their movements were mechanical, precise, eerily synchronized. The captain screamed until his throat tore, but even his pain was mute. The fog surrounded him, pressing against his skin like water. In its depths, he saw them, his men, walking deeper into the gray, their forms fading into ghostly silhouettes. Each step left no sound, no trace, no life, only motion. When he could move again, he was alone. The jungle around him was still, but the silence wasn't empty anymore. It had texture, a constant hum that lived beneath perception. He fell to his knees, pressing his hands against the soil, feeling the faint rhythm of footsteps still moving below. They hadn't vanished. They were marching still, deep beneath the earth, towards something unseen. Days later, when another unit arrived, they found only his helmet lying in the dirt. The recording device inside was still active, but no sound played, just static punctuated by faint vibrations, spaced like footsteps. When analyzed, the pattern revealed a rhythm consistent with marching. The file ended with a brief spike, one final pulse, then complete, unending silence. And even now, when the wind passes through that valley, there's no sound, no birds, no movement, just a faint tremor beneath the soil. Locals say it's the earth itself remembering the rhythm of those who marched too far, men who stepped beyond sound and never came back. The report was never meant to be seen. It was locked away in a metal cabinet deep within the archives of a forgotten base, stamped top secret. Eyes only, dust clung to the corners of the pages, as though even time hesitated to touch them. The first page was mostly blacked out, the redactions thicker than the words, but what remained legible was worse than the silence that followed. It spoke of a containment failure and of men who had been erased, not killed. The classified files began long before the mission. Satellite photos showed an area of land that appeared and disappeared on alternating days, entire square miles shifting, then vanishing from radar. When the analysts cross-referenced older maps, the coordinates didn't exist in any record. It was as if that piece of Earth had been added later, by something that didn't understand how maps worked. Command sent reconnaissance drones first. None returned data. They flew into clear skies and vanished mid-transmission. The footage stopped not with static, but with stillness, frozen frames showing the same landscape for hours before the image melted into grayscale haze. That was when they authorized human deployment. What happened next was marked inaccessible by order of command. The recovered logs were fragmented, handwritten notes, blood on paper, words scrawled in haste. "We can't hear the ground anymore. It's gone quiet." The tone shifted from observation to terror, then to madness. One entry ended mid-sentence, the ink running off the page as if the writer had been dragged away mid-word. A smear of dirt filled the rest. The survivors who returned weren't set. When the search teams finally arrived, the jungle was silent, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that waits. Their footprints ended at the edge of a clearing where the air still felt wrong, heavy, like it was holding its breath. Helmets half buried in mud, rifles jammed upright in the soil, as if the men had vanished mid-fight. There were no bodies, no blood, just a lingering echo, faint but real, like boots marching somewhere deep beneath the ground. The official report called it inconclusive, but those who've stood near that place swear that if you listen long enough, you can still hear them marching, forever trapped in a war that refuses to end.